Toronto was supposed to be impervious. For years, the skyline printed its own headlines: glass climbing higher, cranes stitching new neighborhoods into the sky, pre-construction launches that felt more like festivals than sales events. In the sales centers, espresso machines hissed and touchscreen floor plans glowed. Every unit reserved, every waiting list long. Condos weren't just homes. They were bank accounts, retirement plans, and lottery tickets rolled into a single key fob. Then the rhythm stuttered. By 2025, the average condo in the region was changing hands for less than a year before. Inventory had swollen to levels not seen since the last big scare, and the pipeline that once looked endless suddenly looked finite. The reflexive confidence that defined Toronto real estate gave way to a quieter, more uncomfortable word: doubt. Prices tell part of the story, but it's the speed that makes people blink. Not long ago, $790,000 for an average condo sounded outlandish until it didn't. Then it was normal, then it was old news. In the second quarter of 2025, the average changed again down into the high 600s, with a year-over-year decline that reads small until you lay it across a mortgage amortization table, a condo board budget, and a developer's pro forma. A 5 or 6% haircut on a median unit bleeds into appraisals, bleeds into lending covenants, bleeds into what buyers think they can get away with offering next weekend. Price is a number, momentum is a mood. The number shifted and the mood flipped. Inventory is the mood board. Months of inventory that used to sit comfortably in tight market territory stretched towards 7 by spring, and the charts kept climbing as summer listings stacked up. On paper, that metric is simple: how long it would take to sell everything if no new listings arrived. In real life, it feels like this: hallways where lights are on in only one of 4 doorways, elevators that stop on 3 floors before anyone steps in, realtor lockboxes multiply on the same railing. Pick a floor, pick a view. A downtown agent joked online as she scrolled past dozens of unsold units in a single tower. The punchline landed because it wasn't really a joke. Pressure migrated from buyers to sellers, from open houses to price change emails, from brokers' inboxes to developers' spreadsheets. Developers have seen slowdowns before. This one comes with a twist. The city's under construction total shrank tens of thousands of homes, effectively erased from tomorrow's supply because today's math no longer works. Pre-sales used to race past the 65% watermark banks required for construction loans. Suddenly 65 wasn't enough, and 75% to 80% sold firm became the new minimum, with appraisals and financing vetted line by line before a lender would release a dollar. That's not a conspiracy. It's how risk gets repriced after a cycle turns. If a launch can't hit the threshold, the shovels don't turn. Not in 6 months. Not at all. When shovels stop, the fallout radiates. The people in hard hats feel it first. Union stewards call crews to say the site is paused. Apprentices who finally felt momentum are told to look for hours out west. Cranes stand still in the mornings when they used to swing. Suppliers look at stocked warehouses and thinner purchase orders. A drywall factory sees overtime vanish. A glazing company requotes a job for next year and realizes next year is no longer a promise, just a placeholder. Buyers of pre-construction units feel it differently. A deposit that once felt like the down payment on a future life turns back into a wire transfer refund and an apology note. In the lucky cases, the money returns quickly and cleanly. In the unlucky ones, it limps back after fees and lost time, months in which the resale market shifted, rates shifted, and another rung on the ladder moved just out of reach. Assignment sellers, the investors and early buyers who try to sell their contracts before occupancy. Discover what a market repricing looks like on a spreadsheet. A series of asking prices with red arrows next to them. A buyer pool that insists on discounts not seen since the early 2010 seconds. The reason the Premier's office reads like it's scrambling is that the levers available at Queen's Park or Parliament Hill usually take quarters, not weekends, to translate into closings. Ottawa holds out funding for housing accelerators tied to municipal rule changes, legalizing fourplexes by right, loosening zoning, while the province bristles at the optics of to-the-letter mandates. Municipalities want money and flexibility. Lenders want pre-sales, not press conferences. Developers want predictability and a building code that doesn't move mid-budget. Renters want relief now. Owners want their equity not to slide another centimeter. Everyone wants the same two things: time and certainty, that a turning cycle consumes fastest. Meanwhile, the buyer's checklist has changed shape. Where once the conversation started with "what's the view?" it now starts with "what are the monthly carry costs at today's rates?" Heat pump or fan coil replacement schedules matter. Reserve fund line items matter. Insurance for the corporation matters. Elevators past year 25 matter. A building that hasn't done a full reserve fund study in 3 years, or is sitting on a structural report with asterisks, is no longer a curiosity. It's a financing problem for any purchaser who doesn't show up with all cash. Cash only. Used to be a prestige line, fewer conditions, smoother closing. Cash only, in 2025, often reads like a warning. An association's finances are too murky or too stretched for a bank to accept the building as collateral. And the buildings themselves, it's not glass versus brick, it's PDFs versus PDFs. 2 towers on the same corner, same architect, same year. One has a recent engineering report, funded reserves, a master insurance policy, renewed without triage, and a board that communicates like a fiduciary. The other has a deferred project on the podium waterproofing, a lawsuit over a contractor dispute, a reserve funded below recommendations, and an under review note where the insurance binder should be. One sells in 30 days because a buyer's lender underwrites the building like a borrower, and it passes the test. The other lingers, then sells after 2 price reductions to an investor with cash who understands the risk and prices it in. View, finish, and walkability still matter, but a building's paperwork now writes its destiny. Resale agents relearn the slower dance. List, wait, relist, reduce. The offer night ritual holding back offers to juice a bidding war doesn't go away entirely, but it becomes a niche tactic reserved for the rare units that check every box and sit below a psychologically important price. Everyone else markets in a more honest key. Here are the fees, here is the reserve contribution history, here are the minutes from the last 3 AGMs, here's a letter from the property manager on upcoming works. In a market that is recalibrating, transparency is not just virtue, it shortens days on market. Buyers bring conditions back like they never left. Finance and inspection clauses return to the standard form. A request for a seller credit at closing is common rather than brazen. Negotiation is not a breakdown, it's the process. The rental side that used to catch owners when sales slowed is not a trampoline this time. Rents are high, yes, but carry costs have grown faster in many cases. If a bewildered owner calculates cash flow on a 1-bedroom with a variable rate mortgage resetting in 9 months, rising maintenance fees, and a property tax assessment that assumes yesterday's comps, they discover a truth professional landlords know by heart. Yield is arithmetic, not vibes. Investors who bought pre-construction when money was cheap drift toward cities with simpler math, Calgary and parts of the US. Sunbelt siphon investment because their rents cover debt service and a little more. Toronto is still beloved, but spreadsheets don't respect sentimentality. Rate cuts don't rescue a feasibility gap when the gap is wide enough. The central bank can pull the policy lever and ease fixed rate quotes a few tenths, and the headlines will brighten. But between materially higher build costs, stricter lender pre-sale thresholds, and buyers whose weekly grocery bills keep reminding them that inflation is down, means inflation is growing more slowly, not prices are lower. The market doesn't snap back on command. It heals by clearing excess inventory through price discovery and incentives. Clearing the project pipeline of the launches that won't pencil so the ones that do can move. Clearing buyer skepticism with documentation and realistic pricing. The pre-construction sales center sounds and looks different when the cycle turns. Agents talk less about splash walls and more about closing certainty. Incentives go from granite and parking to hard money. $100,000 off certain stacks, stage deposits, capped development charges, and even interest on deposits held longer than promised if a project starts late. Savvier developers launch smaller, phase their sites more tightly, or pivot a building to rentals where construction financing plus institutional takeout is more realistic than chasing individual buyers at price points. The mortgage stress test still punishes, A few developers shelve plans entirely, conserve cash, and bide time for input costs and subcontractor availability to normalize. It looks like retreat, it's triage. In resale living rooms, individuals are doing their own triage. An owner who bought in 2021 with 5% down has to move for a job. They call 2 agents and 2 mortgage brokers. One agent shows a truth-telling net sheet if they list at comparable last year and sell at probable this year. They will be short at closing unless the buyer agrees to a leaseback that gives the seller time to save or negotiate a lender-approved shortfall plan. The other agent promises the moon. The first agent gets the listing. It sells, not with fireworks, but with relief. On the buyer's side, the deal closes because the buyer's lender had already underwritten the corporation. The buyer had a real pre-approval, and the price aligned with the appraiser's comp set. The marvel isn't that the market slowed, it's that deals work at all with so many more moving pieces in view. Politicians can help at the edges. They can speed approvals by standardizing zoning reforms across municipalities, so fourplex and gentle density permissions don't require a bespoke fight in every ward. They can stabilize the input cost side by cutting red tape around inspections that have no safety rationale. They can top up targeted subsidies that reduce the risk premium lenders assign to well-documented projects, unlocking a tranche of almost viable builds that need a nudge, not a bailout. They can protect buyers better in the event of cancellations, escrowed deposits, standardized timelines for refunds, interest provisions that are real rather than symbolic, so that trust, once frayed, has a path to repair. What they cannot do is legislate a market back to its peak, or ask it to stay there when the broader economy, borrowing costs and demographics are all pointing in a different direction for a while. Demographics, in fact, are the slow drumbeat under the noise. Ontario has led the country in attracting newcomers, and Toronto remains a magnet for talent and ambition, but interprovincial flows ebb and flow with costs and jobs. When Albertan job boards are full and Calgary houses are a third cheaper for twice the square footage, some households vote with U-Hauls. International students, an enormous force in rental demand, are subject to policy shifts and caps. Population growth supports housing demand in the long run. It does not immunize a city from cyclical indigestion in the short run, especially when so much of the pipeline presumed a velocity of sales that relied on yesterday's interest rate regime. For all the macro, the daily drama in Toronto's condo market unfolds in micro scenes. A closing that nearly dies because a lender's building list flags a tower for low reserves, saved only when the corporation lawyer gets a last-minute update filed. A condo board AGM where owners vote narrowly to increase monthly fees by double digits rather than wait for a special assessment. A buyer who toured 8 nearly identical one-bedrooms and chose the one where the property manager picked up the phone on the first ring and emailed last year's audited statements without defensiveness. Confidence grows from small, boring victories like those. And there is this. Markets don't bottom because people run out of fear. They bottom because price and quality meet again at a point both sides can live with. The city will get there the same way every city gets there, through clearing and through better information. A unit that would not sell at last year's number sells at this year's number. A tower that scared lenders on rumor alone becomes financeable when its reserve fund steps onto a predictable path. When its construction defects every building has some are resolved rather than litigated into eternity. When its insurance renewal is measured rather than frantic. A project once too grand to pencil is redrawn, a little shorter and a little squarer, and suddenly the math works at new debt costs. A provincial rule fights less and harmonizes more, letting 1,000 small-scale builders add missing middle homes that never make an Instagram skyline but relieve pressure across the system. There's a temptation in any downturn to talk about panic at the top, as though mood and policy could be swapped like out-of-style fixtures. The more honest reading is that the Premier's public urgency mirrors a private truth in living rooms across the GTA. Households, associations, developers, lenders, everyone is revising assumptions that held for a decade and no longer do. That revision hurts. It also clarifies. The units that will hold value are not a mystery. Buildings that keep strong governance, fund reserves, fix what breaks quickly, and share information win buyers who still need to live somewhere and want to sleep at night. The projects that will secure financing are not a mystery. Sites launched with realistic pricing, staged deposits tied to construction milestones, and credible delivery plans win lenders who still want to lend. The policies that will help are not a mystery. Make approvals predictable, enforce buyer protections and cancellations, and target financing supports where they unlock construction rather than replace it. Walk the city, and you can already feel the two markets that always coexist starting to reassert themselves. There is the public market headlines, forecasts, social media charts, and quips about "this time is different." And there is the market you can touch, doors that open, keys that change hands, crews that pour concrete, boards that vote on budgets, deposit checks that clear. The public market is loud. The touchable market is slower, quieter, and eventually more persuasive. Toronto did not lose its talent, its employer base, its transit network, its universities, or its magnetism because the cycle turned. It lost a sense that housing appreciation was a calendar function rather than a price discovery process. That's not a bad thing to lose. If the next year looks dull compared with the last 5, fewer cranes, more spreadsheets, headlines about stabilization instead of surge, that dullness is exactly what creates a foundation for the cycle after this one. Families will still make kitchens their own. Graduates will still sign their first lease with a grin. Downsizers will still trade square footage for walkability. Developers will still assemble sites and sketch courtyards in notebooks. The path from here to there passes through a lot of unsentimental arithmetic, but the destination is the same: a city in motion. Between here and there, expect more of the same uncomfortable honesty. More price reductions that feel personal but are simply the market's way of saying, "we overshot." More tough AGMs where a few angry voices don't change the math but do help clarify it. More project announcements that pivot to rentals with institutionally backed takeout rather than buyer-by-buyer risk. More small builders quietly putting up fourplexes on streets that never knew they were zoned for them. More lenders sharing building approval lists with conditions that read like report cards. More buyers asking for maintenance logs before they ask about balcony exposure. More sellers including insurance renewal letters in their listing packages to prove a point rather than hide a fear. None of that makes a thrilling headline. It does make for a healthier market. And if the premier looks rattled from the podium from time to time, that's understandable. People are upset, and in cycles like this, politics catches the echo first. But the real work is happening out of frame. 1,000 appraisals pointing to realistic comps. 1,000 negotiations that finish in signatures rather than stalemates. 1,000 tradespeople pivoting to the sites that still pencil. 1,000 buyers finding the one unit that fits both their life and their lender's checklist. That's how a condo city like Toronto learns to breathe again after sprinting for a decade. The crash frame will linger because headlines arrive faster than resolutions. Yet week by week, the elements of an ordinary market are returning. Time to think, room to negotiate, data that informs rather than dazzles. Inventory will crest and start to drain as sellers who need to sell do as buyers who need to buy, reconcile with the new monthly. Projects that cannot survive at this cost of capital will vanish. The ones that can will proceed, smaller and steadier. Boards will do the tedious work of rebuilding reserves and trust. Lenders will edge back into buildings that have earned it. And one day, without a ribbon cutting or a bell to ring, Toronto's condo market will feel less like a cliff edge and more like a sidewalk again. That is not panic. That is the slow, unspectacular business of a great city finding its footing.